Welcome back to Chemicals Knowledge Hub TV. I'm David, and this is the place to be for industry insight and analysis. Today, we're going to talk about how to use scientific knowledge and how it's tackling the world challenges at the moment. Here to unpack that, I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Jones, Senior Research Fellow on the staff of the CTO at Dow, and Joel McDonald, Strategy Leader, also in the office of the CTO at Dow. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Challenges. Oh my word, we've been faced with some challenges over the last 12 months, haven't we? And there are, I've a hunch, many more just around the corner to come in various shapes and guises. Mark, I'll come to you first of all. Give me some examples of how the chemical sector has been contributing to finding the solutions for these challenges.
Okay, thank you very much. Certainly you have many challenges, as you've alluded to, and the pandemic has illustrated many of those. But if we talk about the ones that chemistry and material science generally play in, we have the ones that have to do with materiality materials. So those tend to be energy, food, and water. And we certainly play in all of those. We try to make food more available. We make water safer to drink. All of those things play into what the chemical industry can do to solve challenges moving forward.
And Joel, from a Dow perspective, what are the specific things that you're able to do that you've been bringing to the table to try and meet some of these challenges?
Yeah, thanks, David. So if you look at solutions for the food sector, in particular packaging our food to make sure that it comes from the farm to the tables of our families in edible condition. Also, insulation material that goes into our cold chains to make sure that food gets there in good shape. Paramount to this is not wasting food. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of time to grow the fruits and vegetables and meats that we all consume. And so we want to make sure that they get to the table in good shape. I think beyond that, into the water space, Dow has looked at a variety of technologies to try to reduce the use of water in certain applications. A good example is textiles, where traditionally dyeing of textile materials takes a lot of water. It's a high water process. And Dow has introduced technology that allows you to get brighter colors from dyes while reducing the amount of water required to perform that work. Similarly in your home. So in your laundry room, you're using laundry detergent. Dow has introduced anti-foam technologies that allows the rinse cycle to proceed very efficiently inside your washer so that you don't use extra water, excess water when washing your clothing. And then for energy, the materials sector has a huge role to play there, whether it's developing more robust solar cells that last longer in the field or enabling the next generation of EV, electric vehicles, to be as efficient as possible to make good use of that electricity that's generated in a renewable way. And so those challenges will persist, but materials will be a big part of the solution in those spaces going forward.
Yeah, Dow does play in so many areas of our lives. I just want to pick up on one of those that you mentioned with regards to packaging and plastics in particular. As we look over the last 12 months and some of the challenges that we've faced with the pandemic, what has that told us about the role that plastics have to play? Because it's a divisive material. There are positives, and there are lots of negatives spoken about as well. So, Mark, talk to me about the case for plastics, what it's helped, what it's enabled during the course of COVID-19, while balancing that against some of the detrimental impacts that it has, particularly on the environment.
Sure. Well, I think, one of the things, we have things like, masks, right? These would not be possible were it not for plastic. And they are, so safety has been a big part of what plastics have done during the pandemic, certainly. So the PPE alone has been a big issue. And you look at the value proposition that plastic brings forward. It's an inexpensive material to manufacture. It's inexpensively converted to things that we need. And when you get done with it, it is actually still, it provides great performance in use, but when you're done with it, it is actually cheap enough that you can dispose of it. And if you dispose of it properly, I think, we think that that's a very good thing. Now, all of us have seen masks, laying in the streets these days. So we do, as consumers, have to be responsible and appropriately dispose of the things that we use. But the value proposition relative to safety, whether it be on medical or even just the food containers and things that we get, are a big part of the safety component of plastics. and what they've done during the pandemic.
Yeah, and Joel, obviously, Dow has a big part to play in this. So, what have you been able to do? What initiatives have you put in place to, for example, ensure that plastics, single-use plastics, whatever, are disposed of properly? That we are treating these materials as responsibly as we can.
So we look at it in three different ways. The first is reducing the amount of plastic that's required for a particular application. So our material scientists, our chemists are working continuously on making our materials stronger and thinner cross sections. So you don't need to use as much mass of plastic in a particular application. So that's the first step, reducing the amount that's required. The second step is enabling our plastic materials that we produce to be recycled as easily as possible. And there's really two parts to this. There's the composite structures that combine different polyolefin chemistries. So a good example is a mask or a medical gown in the case of addressing the pandemic. These solutions often combine different polyolefin chemistries that when you try to recycle them, they don't really recycle well together. Another good example is food packaging, multi-layer food packaging. When you have a combination of many different layers in a system, when you go to recycle them by conventional means, they don't really mix well. They're immiscible, and so you don't get the good properties out that you had initially with that product. And so Dow is focused on developing compatibilizer technology that allows you to better integrate materials while you're recycling them so they can go into conventional recycling streams. So that's one part of it, compatibilizers. The other part of it is just to make sure that we incorporate recycled materials into our products. So we kind of complete that circularity. So Dow has introduced some products there as well. A good one for collation shrink that we use to wrap shipping crates, the containers on pallets, to make sure they stay in place. And Dow has introduced a product that contains 70% post-consumer recycled content in that material, but still retains the mechanical properties that are required in that interesting application. So again, compatibilizers, make sure it's easy to recycle something, and secondly, make sure that you can incorporate recycled material into your products. And finally, inevitably, or I should say unfortunately, it shouldn't be inevitable. Unfortunately, plastics are ending up in the environment, and that's a real shame. Mark alluded to the masks on the street that we see today, which is a new feature, but unfortunately, it's a problem that's persisted for a while. And so Dow has invested a great deal of time and money into the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. It's a global initiative focused on trying to reduce the amount of waste getting into the environment. This is a multifaceted effort. It includes both, of course, recycling, but also just better infrastructure for waste management in challenged regions like Southeast Asia, where we know there's not as much infrastructure in place to address waste in general. And so a lot of different approaches that can be taken. Well, collaboration is a big part of this. We collaborate with our value chain partners. We collaborate across the industry to try to deliver solutions that not only reduce the amount of plastic that are required in an application, make sure it is recyclable when we produce that product, and finally make sure it doesn't end up in the environment.
And it strikes me, Joel, that last part is really important. That education piece, because while you can be developing innovative new materials to try and reduce the mass of plastic used in packaging or whatever application, if companies that are then using that material or using other materials don't know that these materials exist, if they are not being as responsible as they might be in their use of those materials, then in a way some of that hard work that you're doing in the industry itself goes to waste. So collaboration, sharing the knowledge and education is, I think, is really, really important. Mark, plastics, as we start looking towards the future here, plastic's here to stay. We've spoken about more responsible, more efficient use of them. But in terms of the future of plastic, what's your view on that?
I think they really have to be. And again, I was just recently introduced to the fact that it took something like 250,000 cows donating their intestines to do something like build the Hindenburg, because back in even in right pre World War II there wasn't anything that could contain those, and the materials that we have today do that quite nicely. And during World War II, polyethylene was a miracle material, right? Some people credit it with saving Britain because of the ability to make radar possible that wouldn't have been possible had it not been for plastic. So there's a couple of things that go from the mundane to the to the very esoteric that nothing else really fills the niche. And so I think we will have to have some form of polymeric material, some form of plastics, whether we can make those more recyclable, whether we can make them less or more benign, less damaging if they do get out into the environment, that's, I think, where our quest has to be, not a question of will there be plastic.
So I'm conscious that we're almost out of time for now. Is there anything that we can do, those of us who perhaps don't work in the industry, who don't have the same roles that you do, but those of us who are, consumers of plastic products? What can we do to play our part in tackling some of these world challenges and finding that balance? And I think that's the thing to take away from here. There is a balance that needs to be struck.
Yeah,
either one of you first. I'll throw that out. I'll throw that one out generally.
I'll take. I mean, it's responsible use, right? The plastic, plastic in itself is not a sinister product, right? It is very useful. Nobody is questioning the value of polyethylene in a syringe for giving people a vaccination. Yeah. We have to then handle that correctly. We have to handle it responsibly. Joel?
Spot on, Mark. I think paying attention to the packaging that you're consuming at your home. Looking at the packaging you use at the store when you get cereals or something. Look for the recycling symbol and understand how that recycling can be done within your home. Set up some local effort inside your household to make sure that you get that stuff back to the right spot so that it can be recycled most efficiently.
Yeah, we've just made a small change in our home with regards to the bins in the kitchen, and the largest bin is now the recycling bin, not the general waste bin. And that small change has made such a difference that I see every week when I'm putting the bins out. It's the recycling bin that's now overflowing rather than the general waste bin. Those small changes can make a huge difference. Listen, Mark, Joel, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. Keep up the good work, and I wish you all the very best for the future.
Thank you.
Thanks.